Okay, this is chapter 7. We're going to talk about the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is one of the major ones these days because we've seen a lot of issues with many diseases, and they usually start in the endocrine system. We don't know because men and women are very different, but that's actually the main place where a lot of the diseases start becoming a real problem. And then, of course, it goes from here to all the other parts, which can be, related to fertility. A lot of people just don't have energy, or sometimes they gain weight, or just don't have vitality. So this is a really big topic, but for now, we're just gonna focus on the main, not only the anatomy, but we're gonna focus on the main key points of how the endocrine system works and also how it impacts our lives and the other systems, right? Our daily routine. So a little bit about me. Around when I was probably 20 years old, I actually was going through a pregnancy that I could not resume because I have health conditions. So I did go through a lot of issues after this pregnancy, and like my hormone levels really spiraled. And I also decided to, start taking oral contraceptives because they told me that it would regulate my periods after this procedure. And in the past, I had also used the famous IUD, which is for the uterus, where they put it's like a T-shaped. Uh, it is a very uncomfortable procedure when they put it on women, but it's basically to prevent pregnancies. But that was pretty bad because it really made me develop ovarian cyst, and it was really uncomfortable. I had so many cramps. I was bleeding a lot, and I always thought that all this synthetic birth control will be beneficial, but the reality is that they are just endocrine disruptors with very long-term consequences to women's bodies. So it's really hard to detox from this. And I went through it for many years until I found again a way to detox and go back to my natural rhythm, the natural hormone cycle. And for men, of course, they don't have to go through pregnancies or any of the contraceptives. It's mostly women that deal with this at a very young age. And there's a lot of, controversial topics about this. But the truth is that this can also affect men in a different way, like especially with all the chemicals and microplastics and all the bad things that we have out there. And that kind of lowers their testosterone levels. And I actually think it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, the synthetic hormones and the toxins in our food and water are the biggest disruptors of the endocrine system today. So I personally had to focus on my diet and the heavy metal detox to support my liver and kidney to balance my hormonal levels. And I think after going through all that, it taught me a lot. So I think if I did it, it's possible that you can do it too, but it will take a lot of patience. And it's not easy because then once you regulate your metabolism, you have a better mood. You also have a better stress response and also more energy and vitality. And not just sexual vitality, it's just vitality overall, even for life. These days, like I said, I'm not 100%, but I do understand now how my body works, which is exactly what you need to learn. And that's my goal with this particular chapter, right? Because you gotta understand the endocrine system controls a lot of things, not just your mood and metabolism, fertility. It also, is how you age, really. Like if you're not sleeping or you're going through stress, how you're eating, detoxifying, and all the different temperature regulations, like I said, and sexual vitality, everything is related to this. And this is a system that touches all of your other systems. Okay, so they are, I would call it the invisible conductors, because hormones are the silent alchemists of the body and shaping really how you think, feel, age, love, sleep, and heal. Because when your hormones are not balanced, your entire body feels, misaligned. When they are balanced, they your body feels great, you know. So either you feel chaotic or aligned, either one, but you have to understand how your system works, because every chronic disease has a hormonal component. The learning outcomes for this chapter is understanding how hormones communicate and regulate all the systems, the connection between stress and the endocrine disruption, how the detox affects hormonal balance. We're going to talk about Ayurvedic doshas and the endocrine glands. Of course, we're going to mention the heavy metals, how they disrupt the endocrine system. And we're going to, similar to the other chapters, go over some food, herbs, and nutrients for hormonal harmony. And finally, the emotional patterns that are stored in each gland. We're going to cover that as well. Okay, now let's go to the anatomy of things. Because this is, again, men and women, very different. But in short, the summary of this is like, it doesn't matter what you do. We all need to detox our bodies. And we also need to understand how they work, right? That's the most important thing. And now the endocrine network, just as an overall, summary, has it's basically includes the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the thymus, which is closer to your chest, as you can see in the photo here, the image next to on your right. The adrenals are kind of like for both of us, and then we have the pancreas, ovaries, or testes, of course, based on what gender you are. Because each gland produces hormones and the chemical messages that tell your body basically how to function. There are messages, right? That's how the body interacts with all the other systems. Now we are, let me just go to the next one. Okay, how the hormones communicate. There's many ways. It can either be via the bloodstream. They also send neurosignals, feedback loops, receptors on every organ, or the circadian rhythms. I don't know if you know what a circadian rhythm is, but it's basically when you go to sleep, the way you go to bed, what time you go to bed and what time you wake up is a very important thing for your body to have all that stability and a routine that it can follow, because that's when your body will recover, like we talked about in the last chapter, right? Now, I would say that in short, the endocrine system is just an elegant orchestra. So all the parts must be tuned, right? It doesn't really shout, it tunes, it harmonizes. When it's balanced, we experience energy, clarity, vitality. But when it's out of sync, we feel the dissonance in every system, right? The nervous, as I was saying, the reproductive, and even the emotional body. And that's even more difficult. Now, the endocrine system is basically a collection of glands that release hormones directly into the bloodstream. Now, these chemicals messengers control everything from metabolism to mood. And as I was saying, the main players include this hypothalamus, the thyroid, and adrenals. But then the pancreas and your ovaries and testes are all part of this symphony, right? So it's very important that you take care of all the different parts of your body, because together these glands, form feedback loops, and they're so intricate that even a single imbalance can ripple across the entire body. And the science calls this the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gonadal axis, which is the longest name, but we'll just kind of resume it in HPAG, which is basically a dynamic communication system that decides whether you're in fight, flight, or flow. It really it's amazing how the body knows, how it connects, and how it sends those messages throughout your body. Now we have hormones and detox, right? We know that the liver detoxes excess hormones. That's why it's important to keep the liver clean. Estrogen, cortisol, any adrenaline, thyroid hormones that are no longer needed. If the liver is overburdened, then the hormone imbalance appears, which leads to the estrogen dominance, or any PMS symptoms or even menopause symptoms for women, and anxiety, adrenal fatigue, and obviously the weight gain. And this is a very, very broad subject, but I'm just saying that modern life pushes the endocrine system beyond its evolutionary design. Like, for example, the blue light at night suppresses the melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And then the chronic caffeine consumption elevates cortisol. Now we also have to add plastics and pesticides with our xenoestrogens. Basically, they introduce all those chemicals that mimic estrogen and confuses the body receptors, which lead to fatigue, the brain fog, and weight gain. So there's so many things that are working against us, honestly. And I would say that there's so many that we could pay attention to, but as long as you keep a healthy diet and just make sure that you're sourcing your food from the right places, and you already have half of the battle won. Okay, now let me go to the next one. Now we can talk about also the blood sugar, right? Blood sugar is always been kind of like a big topic, and we know that there's a lot of processed sugar out there, and it's not just like sugar that you find in your food or the fruits. Talking about processed sugar, which is kind of the most damaging one, and the pancreas really controls the glucose, the insulin, and the energy levels in your body. So when the blood sugar spikes, that's when the cortisol spikes, and then the whole system destabilizes. And that's when some people are like saying that cortisol is actually, making you gain weight in a way, just because you have a sugar spike in your blood. And this is why sugar is the number one endocrine disruptor. And I would just say processed sugar, right? Because there's the natural ones like honey, and then there's some of the sweeteners that people use, but I don't think those are natural. And sometimes honey is not the real honey. Like, I seen it in Mexico and Peru, how natural honey can be, but sometimes in the Western world we don't have those real components. It's just honey that is processed, and that's also not good for you. But which is even worse is the processed sugars, right? And you see it in the labels, you see in the Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and all the sodas, and of course the chip, well, not chips, but bag snacks, anything that you have there, you always have to check those labels because they're really damaging to your body. That plus the stress. Now, the signs of the endocrine imbalance. So you will have physical signs, which is basically fatigue, a lot of hair loss, especially men, irregular periods. And for women, cysts or fibroids, which is a big, big problem these days. A lot of women are having those removed, but they still, they grow back, and it's a whole nother topic. PMS symptoms is really uncomfortable for women. And infertility, we've seen a decline in fertility for women as well. Problems with, acne and hot flushes and weight gain is a major issue, especially in the US. There's a lot related to depression, even low libido for some men or women, and cold hands and feet. Now, there's also emotional signs. Each gland corresponds to an emotional pattern. For example, the thyroid is the expression and authenticity. When that's blocked, you may have thyroid problems, or in the case of the adrenals, it could be related to fear, stress, or just survival, being in survival mode. As far as the pancreas goes, the sweetness of life, the joy, maybe you're just not enjoying your life, or you're just doing something you don't love, and your pancreas will be, feeling that and trying to process those emotions, but they're getting stuck. So you may have pancreas issues, or in the ovaries, for example, is what blocks when you need your creativity and identity, and it gets blocked. It's because you're really not flowing there. And as far as the pineal gland is your intuition, right? And it's calcified a lot with so many of the chemicals out there. I think people say that you shouldn't use fluoride products. They have different, well, there can be many things, but there's a lot of those stuff in the water these days also. And so everything affects our bodies. And finally, the pituitary gland, which is for clarity and alignment, and this work together with the pineal. And again, it's just not it's not working properly if it's blocked with all these chemicals. Because the hormonal imbalance really is the same as the emotional imbalance. They are extremely related, and every organ has its own way of processing it or not. And that's when the problems begin. Now, as far as stress, we said that the cortisol is the master disruptor, right? So when the stress hits, cortisol rises, progesterone drops, the thyroid slows down, and the insulin becomes resistant. And that's the worst that can happen, because that's when you are not able to lose the weight or even like rest, and your body is just running on insulin. Sleep worsens, obviously, and that causes more inflammation. Now, the chronic stress really shrinks the hippocampus, which is your memory center. And that's what we were saying, that you start having that brain fog or just not remember things or having mood problems. Everything is related to the same. So this is exactly why, we call the functional medicine calls adrenal dysregulation, because once the adrenals fail, the entire system will just try to adapt to that constant alarm. For example, when you're in that stress mode, and so the body will adapt or kind of like adjust, so you can actually live in that fight or flight mode. But that's not a good thing, because then it will regulate also your nervous system and other systems. So the body can adapt, and it will continue to work, but at a very, very high price. So this is why you need to pay attention to endocrine and nervous system together, I would say. Now, what is adrenal fatigue? When you overproduce cortisol, right? And not just short term, we're talking about now. Your body has adjusted this to long term, because you're always living in stress, and it will eventually collapse. And that's the worst thing, because it can manifest in many ways. You have burnout, exhaustion, anxiety, the weight gain, the sugar cravings are the worst, and insomnia. But they can also be, causing a lot of problems for like the joints in your body or your muscular health, or so it could be in many other places that it will kind of like manifest, and you don't want that, right? Because your endocrine system cannot thrive in chaos, but your body can either. I mean, it's just your whole body cannot really process this long term. So it's not just the endocrine, it's your whole system, all the 10 systems we're gonna kind of like mention here. Now, doshas and glands. Now, the Ayurveda basically maps endocrine function to doshas, right? We talk about Vata. Vata is basically our adrenal glands, the nervous system, stress and fear together, how you actually balance those. Pitta is basically the thyroid, your metabolism, which is related to anger or any ambition that you have. Again, these are just examples, but there's more to it. Kapha, of course, is related, just kind of like the pancreas, the reproductive hormones. And it's usually related to any attachments or, sense of comfort that you need in your life. So if you balance your doshas, you're really balancing your hormones, but you also need to take a, very deep dive into your emotional health, because there's a lot of things that we sometimes suppress and we don't want to think about, but they are obviously impacting our organs. And it's an interesting way of seeing this, right, as a holistic approach. But that's, again, this is just an intro, but this is something that we got to pay attention to. Now, what are some of the Ayurvedic rituals for the endocrine system? So I will always say that warm grounding meals help a lot. And again, early bedtime, I say 10 o'clock latest. Pranayama, definitely, any of the breathing. I wouldn't recommend any cold drinks, because that kind of disrupts your whole balance and your gut. Oil massages, like we said, for Abhyanga, Shatabari, which is a female hormone support, you can try. Again, the Shawanda is the perfect one for stress reduction. Triphala, we said it was more a digestive detox that you can use at night. And Brahmi is just for mental clarity. Now, what are some of the endocrine disruptors? Again, heavy metals, number one, right? because they interfere with hormone receptors. For example, the mercury affects the thyroid, the lead affects the fertility, men and women, cadmium affects stress hormones, aluminum affects the pineal gland, and the arsenic affects insulin. So imagine all the things that are happening inside your body that you don't even know of. The main foods that will help us. I will always say if you have your own, you know, way to produce your own vegetables at home, or a hydroponic garden, or even like organic, if you can find a good reliable source of fresh vegetables. I'll go with cilantro, chlorella, spirulina, lemon water, garlic, Brazil nuts, like the mayonnaise nuts, but the Brazil nuts are pretty good for selenium. They contain selenium. Onions are really good, and the cruciferous vegetables, which are kind of like the green ones, like broccoli or some cabbage, or the bok choy, which is an Asian. I mean, that's one of my favorites when I was in Thailand, but you can find them anywhere, really. Now they grow. You can find them in any market, but it would be better if it's organic. What is a good nutrition for hormone balance? Definitely avocado, flax seeds, and pumpkin seeds. Maca, maca is from a root from Peru, and you can find it in powder and use it. It's pretty powerful. It's a superfood. Berries, antioxidant, broccoli, sweet potatoes, fermented foods. Not my favorite, but they're pretty good for your gut. And leafy greens. And again, you might need more than one of these, but if you're gonna take iodine, you just have to be careful with that, because you have to look at your levels. That's why we provide the lab testing, so you can actually make sure that you're monitoring this and not just overdosing on some of these things. Iron is really good for menstruating women. Like some of them become anemic. If you are like vegan or just don't eat meat, even more important. But of course, the zinc, B vitamins, selenium, magnesium, omega-3, and vitamin D, those are always the winners. Again, please avoid anything that is related to sugar, alcohol, or anything processed foods. And if you know, like I said, how to avoid pesticides, pesticides are the worst endocrine disruptors. And our food is very contaminated these days, unfortunately, or any artificial sweeteners or soy isolates, because this disrupt hormonal signaling, as I was mentioning before.